You are listening to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida.
Hello and welcome to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast. My name is Tom Argesinger and I'm your host today, and my co-host is Kelly Allen. Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Tom. On the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, we explore how we as Jesus followers can connect the dots between education, contemporary culture, and biblical theology and live like Jesus in this broken and challenging world. But we are so happy to have our two guests today. We have Miss Jill Ashoo and Miss Lawson Smith.
Terrific.
Thank you so much for being with us
Absolutely.
today.
Thanks for
having us.
Today, we are so excited because we are highlighting the Bethesda Academy, which a lot of people don't know about. And so let me introduce you guys a little bit. We'll go right into that. We're going to be talking about the Educational Services Department as well at CCS. But Jill, let me introduce you a little bit. Jill, you started in nursing, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, and you also became an educator of nurses.
That's right. Yeah, I educated nurses for years and patients who were going through chemotherapy.
Awesome. Wow, that's awesome. And so then you served at your church, and you taught about how to best serve the community at your church. How many years did you do that?
About 10 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
So you have a long history. You have a long history of service and teaching, even before you got to CCS.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I feel like all the jobs I've had have led up to this one.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and so now this job is working as lead teacher in the Bethesda Academy here at CCS. Awesome. Well, we'll dive into what exactly Bethesda is. But Ms. Smith, I would love to introduce you. And you have a bachelor's degree in music therapy and a master's degree in special education from FSU.
That's right.
Yeah, but you've also you've been an adjunct professor at FSU in the special education department, is that right?
That's correct,
Yeah,
yes.
and you've taught many grade levels for many years, is that right?
And many levels of special education as well.
Yeah, and me and you have known each other for many years
We
as
have.
well. Yes.
We go way back.
Yes, we do. Well, we're just so happy to have you on here. Let me ask you the first question for today, and that is, what does the Educational Service Department at CCS do?
So we're multifaceted. One of the first things we do is we manage all of the achievement testing, so that's one facet. But the one we're going to talk about more today deals with students with various documented learning differences. And so our department may provide an accommodation plan if they qualify, managing that. Tutoring could be a part of that, some on-staff tutoring. What we call resource classes, where we can give a little bit more intensive instruction for students who may need that. We have another program called the Compass program, and it serves students with autism, and it helps with a lot of the non-academic skills that they need to be able to be successful in school. And then we also have just piloted a brand new program, the Bethesda Academy, this year. So
It's wonderful.
It's just not, I don't know that it's typical for a lot of private schools to have a fairly well-developed and robust special education program in that school. Now, it does happen, but I don't think it's very common. So what are some of the reasons maybe you guys think that, why is that, do you think? Why is it hard to have that happen on a successful, continuing basis?
yeah, I think, and I agree with you, just seeing schools around our state and even nationally, there's often attempts to serve kids with disabilities, but it is very challenging. The finances are probably one of the big reasons, and just having people with some expertise and knowing, a disability can be so many different things, and so there are so many different answers to what they may need. And
it's really a complex equation, so to speak. It's very complex because you have, and it's also a very emotional thing, I think, for parents as they try to walk through these. I remember of folk we know really well. Pam Hollingsworth would always say, you're really dealing with, in some cases, the death of a dream that somebody, they expected A to come out and it actually is coming out as B, and they're trying to grapple with that, or they're just trying to understand how to serve their child better. So do you guys see, as you've worked through the years, have you seen that kind of thing in play where parents are just trying to figure this out? Yeah.
For sure. Me personally, I've walked through with a lot of parents who've gotten new diagnoses of their children, and just giving them space to mourn, like you said, and giving them time to grieve. and allowing them to do that. I think if we pass by grief too quickly, we sort of suppress it. And so allowing them that space to grieve, but also then champion them on this new path.
Right, because we don't want to stay there. We want to move forward. So Kelly, maybe from a parental standpoint, try to put yourself in the place of a parent who's experienced that. I mean, what might that feel like to you?
Yeah, this conversation is new for me because, my kids have challenges in different ways, but they wouldn't qualify for Bethesda Academy. And so I love learning about this today, but yeah, I would think that when you do get new diagnoses, and my kids have different diagnoses in different areas, but yeah, it's like a grieving, but also a changing gears. What do we do now?
Good.
And I love it that CCS has some of those answers. Not only will you walk with the parents, but you're providing answers to the challenges that they're facing.
Yeah, very true. That's a great perspective, and I think doing this should be part and parcel of any gospel-centered school. Because it's really difficult to talk about the gospel and not talk about serving populations or groups of kids that have varying kinds of needs to the extent you can. Which kind of gets into, if you're thinking from more of the theological kind of perspective, it kind of gets into how at CCS at least, how a gospel-centered school would see kids in general, but maybe specifically the kids in programs like Bethesda.
Yeah, I think, getting to the truth of what's going on with a child, a diagnosis can help. It's one perspective, but there's many things to look at, teacher observations, the parent reports for what's going on at home. And when you can finally get to what the truth is, the Bible says the truth will set you free, and you can then plan things on a very firm foundation. If you haven't gotten all the way to all of the issues going on, then sometimes that building can be faulty.
Sure. So the information kind of feeds into the wise choices and decisions that go along with it.
Yes.
So how would you guys talk a little bit about maybe the kid themselves, the child themselves, and how we see them as people in the kingdom? Maybe kind of that angle of it.
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways the public and just people in general may view someone with a disability or with a learning challenge. And, for us in the kingdom of God, we want to really look at them as co-laborers in that kingdom because, everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses, but God has a purpose for every single person, no matter what our perception is of that person. So I think that's a really important thing to always keep in mind as we, are inviting these kids to be educated here at CCS and partnering with those families. They can be able to be on a track to perform some particular will of God that we might not even see.
That's so great. I love that. Yeah, because ultimately that's what we want for all of the kids in a gospel-centered school like CCS, and that includes all the kids, not just some of them, not the ones who might perform a little differently in certain ways. Are there, Jill, maybe you can think of some ways that gets fleshed out, like when you think about your kids and you think about how you plan and how you manage that program, does that kind of come into your thinking as what might that look like for you?
Well, I think first you have to realize that every child is an image bearer of God, and really seeing that they are made by God uniquely, just like us. So I don't really see them as different. I see them as image bearers. So how I flesh that out is they all have different needs, just like we do. They all have different abilities, just like we do. And it's really fun to start seeing them come out when you create a really safe, loving environment for them. And you can really hone into what are they doing well, right? What can they do? And not focus on what they can't do.
Yeah.
Right?
So you don't call it learning disabilities. What do you call it?
We call it learning differences. I think it's important for all of us to know that there's not one way to learn something, right? We are not all created the same. In fact, I think if you think there's one way to learn, you miss out on all the awesome different ways to look at things. And the students really show me and us all the different ways you can look at something, and you can learn from each other. We learn from each other.
That reminds me too of, I heard a pastor one time say, when he was talking about these kinds of things, and it could be true of someone who's going through chronic illness or anyone who has some sort of an issue or condition that requires other people to somehow make some accommodations for the way they are. And the point I think he made in the sermon, this was years ago, but really saying that there's a sense in which God uses that person to change you.
Absolutely.
So it isn't all about the person and what their struggle is,
Yes.
and we think, I'm going to help you because you have this, whatever this is. But the reality is sometimes the exact opposite happens.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen experienced anything like that?
Daily.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's part of God's intention. It's almost like part of discipleship. It's part of our growth as Christians, not only to have mercy or compassion, which is, I think, where it begins, but also to be humble and receptive, to say, I've got something to learn from you. I may not know exactly what it is, but it's something. Reminds me of a story about Henry Nouwen, very famous writer, and he went to work at a community called L'Arche Community, and essentially it was working with kids who were pretty profoundly, I can't remember exactly what their situation was, but it was pretty profoundly challenged. And to the point where that student could not give them anything back. There was no reciprocity. So his job, he had been a priest for years, and his job was just to serve this young person. I think it was a teenager. And they could do absolutely nothing to give back to him anything. And he said there was such a profound learning experience for him when he realized that God was giving to him through this teenager, even though the kid himself was not in a position to do that. It's just so many dynamics at work that we don't realize unless we start to pay attention.
Yeah, what a gift that student gave to him.
Yes,
Right?
right? But that is a uniquely gospel-centered paradigm.
Yeah, it really is.
Because you hear so many things. I don't want to go too far afield here, but later in the spring, we're going to be talking about a lot of other things like artificial intelligence, various other things. And many times people will see these kinds of things that need to be avoided at all costs. No matter what happens, whether it's through looking at what's going on in the womb and whatever that is. So, but there's a sense in which God's wisdom is in play, and the fact that nobody's saying, by the way, it's not easy, and sometimes it's really brutally hard, but doesn't mean it's not meaningful and not useful in the kingdom in some way. Because these kids are very useful in the kingdom.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very, very important thing. So maybe we should dive into Bethesda Academy a little bit. So Jill, tell us a little, you want to maybe say a couple things about the big picture, and then we'll kick it over to you and you can talk about the day-to-day.
Sure. So Bethesda Academy has been birthed out of a lot of prayer, a lot of desire at our school to continue to serve students with disabilities. And we've had a pretty robust program for years, and it's always been a part of our DNA and who we are. But the Bethesda Academy is going to be serving kids who require a different curriculum than just the general ed curriculum. It needs to be very functional. There's functional academics where they are certainly learning their language arts and math, but they need to learn it in the situation where they need to use it. So that's a little different sometimes than a regular class. Spiritual formation is very important. That's one of our chief goals is to make sure that they learn about who they are in Christ and who they are in the eyes of God. And we do a lot of inclusion where they're included in various classes or activities, even the simple things, lunch, recess, all of those kind of things, they're included there. And they also are a big part of the leadership program, which is a program that culminates in high school and particularly in 11th and 12th grade, but it really spans the whole school. And this year we piloted the program and they participated beyond our wildest expectations.
I love that.
So that has been wonderful. And on both sides, our students have just welcomed these kiddos with open arms. And the age range we're serving is 6th grade, and for next year up through the rising 10th grade. We're trying to build the program, as we go. We also look at functional skills like vocational training, independent living skills. Those are things that they'll need to master as they're moving out of our program. And we also focus on transition as they get ready to leave CCS. What services are available for them? Where do they need to go?
Because there are a lot of services available for various kids, but and you and I have talked about this, but there's can be gaps in that process. Maybe you can touch on, especially as they get older and need to make transitions, et cetera.
Yes, and we are very fortunate here in our area. We have a couple of agencies that we've already connected with.
They do a great job.
Yeah, Next Steps in Mariana and Future Pathways here in Tallahassee. And so the staff there are just incredible, and they are really giving us a lot of guidance in how we can work towards transition.
Right. And at the same time, there's a lot of, what I gather at least, the potential is there's a lot of children who need that. And so it's not like those agencies do a great job.
Yes.
But their needs
for adults.
They're for adults,
Yeah,
right. And
young
so,
adults.
again, trying to make that transition through upper high school and then moving on, because that's got to be a challenging time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a parent, you're thinking what does it mean to launch?
Right.
There are many parents who are watching this saying, "Yeah, I have the same problem. My kid's in my basement. I don't know what they're doing there."
Absolutely.
But this is a different situation.
Yeah.
Right.
But because all of those definitions, are a little different.
Yes. Yeah.
And that requires a lot of humility to be able to say, those basic kinds of things. Another thing that comes to mind is that I've always thought was a really interesting part of this discussion is, how does God interact with someone who is not interactive? What does that really, I know it sounds maybe a little silly, but what does that look like? Because I remember a good friend of mine, David Pinson, I used to have these conversations about this, saying, this young person who is challenged in various ways, and in some ways, some people severely challenged, maybe like this student that worked with Henry Nouwen, does that mean God can't have a relationship with that person? No, it
we
doesn't
may not
mean
be
that.
able to perceive
Right.
that interaction, but I do believe it exists. And just the nature of the program we're trying to provide at Bethesda, it can lay some groundwork for that expression. You know. So.
And I think that's important.
Yeah.
It's a big part of it.
So Jill, you're in the classroom every day with the kids. What does your day look like?
Yeah, so up to this point, the students are usually focused on what they can't do. And now in Bethesda, we're really focusing on what they can do. So functionally, as far as academics, we just meet them where they are. So if you are a 12-year-old and you need to learn how to read, we'll teach you how to read. If you have those abilities. If you are not functioning at the grade level that your age says you are, we'll meet you where you need to. And so what we focus on, like Lawson said, is we're just real world things that you need, which probably all students wish that we all focused on. No trigonometry, no algebra. But what we focus on is, how do we make change? How do we deal with money? How do we save money? And we do different programs to help with that. How to tell time, elapsed time. That's really important that we take for granted.
That's good. Yeah.
Right? How long is this going to take? And we've been, as far as inclusion goes, it does look like a 9th grade math class, because we do have kids in the math. Sorry, I meant to say Bible class, and PE. But it's also in our own classroom. We share the space with kindergartners who eat lunch there. So one of our vocational skills is we set up the lunchroom for them, and they come in, and then we clean up after the kindergartners. And a couple of our students just love being around littler kids, and so I carve out time for them to just play outside with the kids, but knowing that they're the role models, right? And
so good.
It's a
They're the
vocational,
supervisors,
it's a vocational training in that, well, maybe this is something that they could go on to work in childcare, work in a church nursery.
Yeah.
And so we're building on those skills. There's students who love being around animals. And so we've been going to farms, and we got to go to a horse farm and learn, what does it take to learn what does it take to care for a horse, right? And we're going to go to a chicken farm, which our students are really excited about. And so what we do is we just see what they're good at, what makes them come alive, what makes them excited, and then just hone them into possibly becoming vocational jobs after Bethesda in the community. But mostly we're on campus serving our school. And then eventually we'll go out into the community and find ways that they can serve the community as well.
Have you heard any feedback from like the kids and parents that are not in Bethesda Academy about the students of Bethesda?
So I also have a daughter who happens to be in the grade that my two students are, and just watching and having good conversations with her and her friends of how it's just really opened their eyes to being around kids who are different, but not so different that they can't find a common ground with them, can't become friends with them. It really challenges the way that they see the world, and maybe not everyone is just like me. And I think the more that we expose, even just ourselves, the more we expose ourselves to people who are different than us, the more we realize that we're very much alike, and we can learn so much from each other.
I have the same experience with my daughter. She's become friends with your students, and even one came to her birthday party. So
that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, you gotta love that.
So it's really great. They're making new friends.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's funny because that was a great explanation, Jill. And as you were talking about that, it's like, gosh, there are a lot of kids who would go, yeah, can I do that program?
Yes, my daughter and her friends all want to be in part of the Bethesda program. We do just a lot of fun things, but also we do a lot of hard things, and we talk about, well, we have to do hard things, right?
That's how, and
we
it connects.
Have to do hard things,
and that's one of the ways it connects back to the leadership program.
Right? That's right.
And sometimes you do the hard with the right thing, and in a moral sense, but also just you have to persevere. And that's I love that. That's just really a big part of that program.
And if I can say, Jill has just done a great job too with a concept called community-based instruction, where these kiddos that are in Bethesda, often they need a very concrete, real setting to learn. Generalizing can be a challenge, and so she has found places on campus and off campus to teach those skills. So that's been just a real joy to watch and see.
It strikes me that there's. Although from the outside, it's like, well, you're not dealing with that many kids. There's one section of this class, and it's small, but there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot to it, a lot of administration. And Lawson, you've done a fabulous job in bringing all of the experience that God's brought to you in your life and your heart, even more importantly, or as important, to the whole process. And constructing and kind of managing the not just the special ed program in general, educational services, but also now specifically with Compass and Bethesda. And then you stepped in and used your gift. I just love that. I love people stepping into their giftings and just really excelling, which is what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
How does someone apply to the Bethesda Academy?
Oh, that's a great question. So you simply can call CCS or email and ask for our admissions coordinator. Her name's Debbie Leonard, and she'll get us in contact so that I can talk with you to see if this is going to be the right program for your child. It may not, but I can at least help get to the bottom of that. So I just call the school and I will get that information. You can also go on our website. We've just recently put all of the information about Bethesda Academy there under our academics tab.
And so just to drill down just for a little bit more, so they do start the process the same way, which is they contact Debbie Leonard and kind of basically start the conversation. But pretty quickly thereafter, it kind of goes into your court. And so the main conversations, and probably eventually Jill's as well. And because I think I'm right on this. You correct me. But the admissions process for Bethesda kind of runs alongside of the more traditional admissions process. A lot of similarities, a lot of overlap, but basically it is a process unto itself because there is a lot of conversation.
Right, and I try to vet it as well as I can so that we get the right track as far as admissions goes. And so I try to do that before we even open up admissions, so that we just make sure that we have that student in the right pathway, for enrollment.
Yeah,
So
that's good. So maybe an interesting way to end today might be this. Like, if you were to, maybe we can go maybe to you, Jill, and then maybe end with you, Lawson, in the short time that we have right now. And just if you were to give advice to a parent who might be watching and they're struggling with this issue with their child, they don't really know what to do, maybe just some good basic advice on how to approach that challenge. And it could be whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, I think first, we just fall at the feet of Jesus. I think with anything, and that allows us to see where we are as children of God. And so when you can see your child as a child that's God's, that sometimes you have to really release your child to God. And that's really hard for all parents, I think. And then trust that the Lord is going to lead you where your child needs to go. So offering that up in prayer, and really submitting to His will, I think is just a really hard thing for all parents, but specifically, and then I think just really maybe look at your child with different lenses. We talked about the death of Plan B, of A. Maybe just start imagining a Plan B and what that might look like. And then really just ask the Lord to send you the people to help you with that Plan B.
Right. That's so good. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to be honest, a lot of our Plan A's don't work out all that well, right? And thankfully, God is a God of the Plan B as well.
Exactly.
What would you add anything to that?
And I agree with Jill, moving from a mentality of ownership over our children to being stewards that God has given us over the children, that's a really important perspective. And I would just add to that, looking way into the future, often dealing with and parenting children with special needs, it can be challenging, it can be exhausting, it can be very, very hard. There are moments of joy, and all of it is bound up together. But sometimes it's hard to pull yourself out of that and go, okay, so my child is in 9th grade, but in 3 short years they're going to graduate, and then what? And there are lots of possibilities for that transition. So always looking forward, always looking at capacity of the child rather than what they can't do, and it's challenging because our society really doesn't allow for a lot of that. But continuing in prayer and asking God to give you His vision of your child is the biggest thing. And
maybe we can end on this point, and that is that when you think back to what Jill said as well and what you've reinforced, this is not something you can do by yourself.
Right. No.
So if there is that parent that's out there just going, I'm in my apartment somewhere in some city, and I've got this situation, and maybe I'm the only parent in the home, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of complications. The reality is nobody can do that by themselves, and there has to be a community, and that's where we hope the church will come in, or Christian schools, or some other, and that includes agencies of the state that are good agencies with good people in them, and to realize you can't do it alone, so you have to seek help. So that's an important thing.
Yep.
So, well, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you guys.
Thank you
really has
for letting us come.
I feel like we've scratched the surface because it's a really big topic.
Yeah.
But I think it was a good start.
Yeah.
At least. And I want to say just from my work as the head of school at CCS, I am so grateful for you guys and for the work that you put in, the tremendous amount of work you put in every single day.
Well, and we're just so grateful that we serve under a head of school that wants to see this continue.
Yes.
So,
well, it's been, as you know, it's something that God put on our heart many years ago, and we're just trying to follow through what He told us to do the best of our ability. So, well, it's been a great time. Thank you so much for listening to us today. And remember, if you forget everything else that we said today, remember that Jesus Christ is Lord. Thanks for listening today, guys. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
bye.
Thank you for listening to the Gospel Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida. You can find us online at myccs.org.